Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. Recently, my wife was kind of going back and forth with someone on Twitter about biblical marriage and who has authority, quote unquote, in the household. And this was kind of in the context of who goes to work versus who doesn't. And I think you were initially replying to something where I think the question was something like, does the wife have to submit to her husband's will concerning her working outside the home or something like that, right?
It was, does a husband have the authority to tell his wife she can or cannot work outside the home?
Okay, yeah. And I think you replied something like, oh, it's a mutual decision, right?
Well, yeah.
Like they would talk about it together.
The essence of what I was trying to say is I don't really like the phrasing. Like, there's a problem with the way the question is being asked, which is, does he have the authority to tell her what to do about this? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that captures the spirit of how it should actually work in a marriage. Mm-hmm. Either party telling the other what to do. So, kind of what I was saying, what I responded was, they should talk together and work out a decision as teammates mutually. It's not about one or the other telling the other what to do.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. But I think oftentimes more of the, let's say, like traditionalist types or traditionalist Christians would kind of balk at that a bit, right?
Balk at what I said?
Yeah. Because it kind of gives off this air of like modern egalitarian stuff. Okay. So I'll say something and you tell me if you agree with me on this, okay? So I think marriage is equal in that both parties are equals, but it's not 50-50.
Okay. What do you mean by 50-50 then? I mean, I agree with the statement it's not 50-50. When I hear that, though, generally when you hear people talk about marriage being 50-50, they're referring to splitting up the responsibilities or tasks evenly. So both are like carrying their fair share of the weight around the household. And then what a lot of people will say pushing back on that is, you shouldn't look at it as 50-50. I've done my even part. Now you have to do this part. It's both serving the other.
Yeah, so I think in the same way that you should be looking at things like the phrasing I use is like 100-100. Like I try and think like I am doing basically 100% of the things, and then when I don't have to do something, I'm happily surprised basically that I don't have to do that thing. And then you don't have that differential between expectations and reality that breeds resentment oftentimes.
Yeah.
So when I say marriage is equal but not 50-50, I think it's kind of taking that same mentality and applying it to what I would maybe call the decision-making process. So in that decision-making process, I think the utmost weight on what I would maybe dub like the emotional or feeling side should be put on what the wife thinks. And I think that's kind of like the husband's role, right? So I should be having your feelings as paramount.
In any decision?
Yeah. Well, in the feelings realm. So I think there are kind of two components to a decision, and that's kind of like a logical side of things and then an emotional side of things. And that doesn't...
So the wife gets basically 100% of the say on the emotional side is what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that the wife's emotional feelings in the emotional realm should be number one.
Above the husband's emotional feelings.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say that we're talking about purchasing a car.
Which we have been doing.
Yeah. You can conceive of any aspect of that decision-making process or any option there are a variety of factors, both logical and emotional, even for things that are kind of like on the edge or at the extremes. So you could take something like a bright red sports car, right? That's kind of an extreme example of a car, okay? And there's a logical side and a logical reason as to why you would purchase that. And there's certainly an emotional side, an emotional reason as to why you would purchase that, okay? So the emotional side would be, oh, well, it's super cool, and come on, that would be so sick, that'd be so fun. Wouldn't you just love that? Okay? But then there is a logical side to it where you go, well, you know, the sports car would be a lot smaller than a normal large sedan or an SUV. So we would have more space in the garage for other stuff, or it would make it easier to get into our other car if we had a little red sports car and it didn't take up that much space.
An actual argument you tried to make to me. Yeah.
Actually, that was familiar. What you found
that
interesting.
One sounds familiar. I seem to recall you trying to make that argument.
Sure, but my point is, for any option, there's kind of a logical and an emotional side of things. And I think when it comes to the emotional side of things, women in particular, from what I've observed, I think they oftentimes are taking other people's well-being into account from an emotional side of things probably a bit better. So if I had to detail like the quintessential female emotional side of an argument when purchasing a car, it would probably be something like, well, I want the car to be really safe and I want it to, be able to protect our kids if we get into a car accident. Like that to me
maybe. I mean, like, some women are like, oh no, I want my Land Rover or my G-Wagon because it's a cool car and I want to drive around, a cool mom.
Okay, do you think that women tend to emotionally care for kids more or less than men?
I have no idea.
Dude, come on. Come on.
Emotionally care for more or less?
Yes.
I don't know that you can say one. You're saying men care emotionally for their kids less than women? I don't know that I could say that confidently.
What?
Women tend to be more like neurotic.
Okay, psychologically speaking, women have substantially higher emotional responses to children
than men.
Yes.
I mean, how are you measuring emotional responses? Because at first you said, like, emotionally care more. And are you saying they're more emotional about children? Because you threw the word care in there, and I'm like, I don't know that I could say men don't care emotionally.
No. You're confusing general care with emotional care, okay?
Well, then I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay, when I say emotionally care, I mean, like, empathize and sympathize, okay? This is biologically true.
Women are generally more empathetic, yes.
And sympathetic, and especially when it comes to kids, and especially when it comes to their kids.
Okay.
Okay. So, when they have an emotional opinion, it's generally taking into account the empathy and sympathy and betterment.
Women are more like relationally oriented too. They more look out for relational harmony.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, when you mentioned earlier, some woman wants some Range Rover or whatever, even the quintessential vehicles that you're associating with, a woman wanting a bougie thing, these are still, like, safe, large, heavy family haulers. And the quintessential thing that men like are fast, loud, two-seater sports cars.
Okay.
So even
there are a lot of generalizations we're making, but yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, but I'm speaking in generalities. So even in, like, those quintessential examples of cars, those differences show up. So I think when you're going and you're making a decision whatever components of emotions factor into that decision, I think the greatest emphasis on the emotional side should be put on the female's perspective.
She should have the
general.
greatest influence into that side of any decision making. That's
Correct.
what I'm saying.
Correct.
Can I take a wild guess at what the man's should be?
Sure.
He should have the greatest influence in the logical side of any decision making. Is that right?
I think that's one way that you could characterize it.
Is that where you're going with it?
Yeah, I think that's one way that you could characterize it.
Okay, so how does this manifest? Because we're talking very much out in the ether and generalities. Give me a practical example. What are you talking about here?
Sure. So let's say that we're talking about, let's continue with that car example. Okay. The dude emotionally wants to get a super cool red sports car.
But his emotions don't matter in this decision
It's
making.
not that they don't matter, it's that they don't reign supreme. But yeah, okay. And the woman wants to get a safe family hauler for the kids. Okay, let's say a Range Rover. Okay.
Okay.
I think the safe family hauler for the kids, that emotional side of things reigns supreme. Okay. Then you flip to the more logical side of things and you go, okay, what can we afford here? And what is going to make logical sense? Okay, should we go and get a Toyota RAV4, a Toyota Highlander? Or should we go out and get a Cadillac Escalade or a Range Rover? Okay? And on that, I think you would default to, again, if we're speaking in generalities, let's say the female perspective, again in generalities, is, oh, I want to have the kids as perfectly safe as possible and I don't want to deal with any cars breaking down, so I want to go out and get a new Range Rover or Escalade. Okay, and the male perspective, looking on the more logical side, is, okay, yeah, like, I get that we should get some family hauler. Okay, I've, factored that emotional side of things in, but logically, we should be working within our means here. And we should buy something that, yeah, is definitely safe and yes, practical for our family, but within our budget.
Okay, so where do they end up then?
So I think you'd end up, if we are going through that like 4x4 matrix of sorts, you end up at, yeah, like a RAV4 that's safe for the family but still financially feasible and practical.
Is this hypothetical man not overwhelmed by his emotional desire to get a red sports car that he can't see the logical arguments for something else?
Well, ideally, both people, and I think this is kind of what you were getting at when you were talking about, well, I don't think anybody should be forced into something, okay? I don't think that the man should just go out and decide what car, and I don't think that a woman should just go out and decide what car. I think that there's kind of a push and pull and a balance that you strike here. And I think that's what you were getting at too, right?
Okay, so you're trying to explain how the two different perspectives need to interact in order to come to the best compromise or the best solution, basically. So
yeah,
we need to toss out the man, like, I'm going to speak crudely here, but toss out the man's emotional desire to get a red sports car. Toss out the woman's logical reason to get a Range Rover. If there's a logical reason, I can't imagine one because those cars are stupid. And then take the logical inputs from the male and the emotional inputs from the female, mix them together in a pot, and say what's the best option with those.
So
that
so
I don't know if that made any sense. That's me trying to conceptualize in my mind what you're trying to say right now.
So first off, we're gonna have some Range Rover fans who are unhappy with you, but I would say.
You think I care?
Okay, I would say not toss out, but it's that we're holding the other side in more higher regards.
All of this is dependent upon both parties, or it seems like all of this is dependent on both parties being conscientious enough to understand the reasoning behind their desires for things. Right? Like, do you think most men want to go get a red sports car and they understand that it is emotional reason? Or most women go want to get a Range Rover and understand the emotional reasons behind it? Like, I don't know that most people can do that.
I don't know, but what I do know is that I am not a good judge for most people.
I mean, I guess if anything, it's a call to like really think about why it is you want the things you want.
Yeah, I think
example.
Yeah, I think one way that you can kind of get on the same page from a conscientious perspective, though, is by kind of agreeing to an ultimate, like, high-level goal with something, right? Like, when you express the ultimate desires, what we're looking to achieve with something, I think out of that you garner better understanding of things. Because once you detail that high-level goal and you recognize the situation that you're addressing, I think more of those things become evident. Right? So in the case of getting a car, for example, when you say the high-level goal of this vehicle is to get our family from place to place, one aspect of that is cost. Another aspect is like fuel efficiency. Another aspect is safety, right? And you take all of those things together and you agree with your spouse on that kind of high level goal, and then you flesh out the details from there. And I think that's kind of what happens in like a biblical marriage. And you have leaders at different points that help flesh out those details and make arguments for different things. I mean, that's even like what you agree upon when you're getting married, right? The agreed upon goal is that both parties are pointing towards God. And like you're saying, well, that's paramount. And we're going to do our best together to move both of us in that direction, right?
Yeah.
But I think one thing, and this is oftentimes where, like, at least I think the egalitarian types get it wrong. And I think what the initial question was really kind of getting at, which is when you reach that crux of something, when you reach a point where we can't come to like a clear agreement, right? Because we disagree on something.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make a decision?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's what the guy was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Based on this original question we're talking about, when he was asking, does the husband have the authority to tell the wife that she can or cannot work outside the home? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you just said is what he was trying to get at, but the reason why I initially pushed back against that question and took issue with the wording is because based on exactly how it's worded, I would say no. Because I would say neither party has the authority to just tell the other what to or not to do. That's not how authority in a relationship works, or how it should work in a marriage relationship.
Yeah.
I think, yes, what he's getting at is, okay, if you come to a disagreement and you're at a stalemate, mm-hmm. Now what do you do? Like, who gets to make the ultimate decision? Or how do you proceed from that point? But the way it was worded made it sound to me like he was saying, oh, could the husband just come in and be like, hey, you can't work anymore? And she has to obey him. And it's like, no, that's not how this should work in a marriage.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we oftentimes talk about is like, how does something functionally manifest? And I think that difference, the difference between, oh yeah, I just have the authority here and I can say or do whatever, and while we're actually talking about things, it functionally manifests in two different ways. One is you're actually having that conversation and you're actually factoring in like all perspectives. Because I think the problem is oftentimes the traditional side of things doesn't factor in like the female emotional side of things, because it does matter.
Yeah, I think the whole posture of the question was wrong.
Yeah, but I also think like that when you sit down and have those conversations, the differences aren't night and day anymore, right? It's like we're talking about a couple degrees of separation instead of like 100. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
right.
when we've actually talked about things and factored in all of the perspectives, like you're not comparing totally black to totally white anymore. At least I don't think so. That's never been my experience. And then I think what the biblically described thing is that, yeah, well, once you've gone through that, like if we've got 0 to 100, right? Let's say you started at 0 and I started at 100. I think the problem is what that question seemed to be asserting is I come in, I say it should be 100, you say 0, and then we go, well, we disagree, but I'm the man, so we're going with 100. Instead of sitting down and going, well,
Yeah.
here are the reasons why I think 0, here are the reasons I think 100, and we kind of whittle it down, and now we're deciding between 50 and 52. And at that point, you just go, okay, well,
and
it's
then
52 then.
you've actually gone through that process, which
Yeah.
cheesily, it's about the journey, not where you end up at, right? You've gone through the process of negotiating with your spouse, discussing things, listening to each other, slowly inching towards an agreement, or at least better understanding where the other's coming from. So
Yeah.
that's why I say, like, no, neither party should ever just come in and be like, this is the area I have authority, here's what we're doing. Even if that party does have or should have the ability to, after negotiations, have that final say, that's never how it should just work, is coming in and saying, this is what you're doing, you have to obey. No.
Yeah, I agree, but I will say something that I do think is important is having one person, one leader in the end who like does have a final say. Like I think that is something that the traditionalist side does get right. And I think that there are a lot of functional reasons why.
There always has to be one singular point of authority at the highest level. Like,
Yeah.
two completely equal, it doesn't really work. I don't know where else you see that. Right? And now you have checks and balances for the one authority. Like, otherwise you have a dictatorship, and that's not what a marriage is supposed to be. But you have one president of the United States. You have one CEO of the company. You have one highest authority.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that a person is a dictator and has 100% say and can make every decision. No, but they are the highest ultimate point of authority.
Yeah, I think the thing that I always think of when considering like that singular leadership point, like a good leader is taking into account everyone else around them who's providing input, okay? But I think the critical point there is that when you have a singular leader who makes that final decision, they are able to execute on a singular vision as well. And I think that's important for a number of reasons. The first is sometimes a plan takes multiple steps to execute. And maybe two plans could work out, right? Plan A has steps like 1A, 2A, and 3A, right? And Plan B has steps 1B, 2B, and 3B. But you can't like mix up these steps, right? Plan A might work in its entirety, and Plan B might work in its entirety, but you have to like pick one and commit, right? You can't go with part A1 and then B2 and then C1. You can't like mix and match. And I think having a singular leader allows you to execute on a singular vision. And then the other thing that's really critical is having that singular point of contact to hold somebody accountable if that decision is made wrong. Because it's too hard to hold like kind of an ambiguous set of people accountable, right? Like that
holding one person, holding that leader accountable. Yes. You're saying,
yeah, oh, okay. that one leader accountable. So there's one person who you can go and you can point to and you can say, you made the call, you made the decision, because otherwise you get like basically like a bystander effect.
What's that?
So the bystander effect is like oftentimes characterized with like somebody having like a heart attack or a seizure on the ground. Oh, and everyone's standing around, all these bystanders are there, and everybody thinks, oh, well, somebody else should step in. There are so many people around, somebody's going to step in. But when everybody thinks that, nobody steps in. And I think similarly, when you just look at this whole group and you're like, well, somebody has to take accountability. Well, there are 100 people, and there wasn't one person who made that call that we can point to and say, this person had the final sign-off. They had the final decision, and they approved this.
Ultimately, they are responsible for this, company, this organization, this whatever.
Yeah. And I think, like, you brought up CEOs and managers and like, hierarchies like this where you've got one person at the top, and, like, there's a reason why businesses function in this way. It's so that like one vision can be executed on and one person can be held responsible for that one vision.
Right. You need one person steering the ship. You simply cannot have two people at an equal level with exactly equal say and authority in a matter, both steering the ship, because no two people will ever agree 100% on everything.
Yeah.
So you're going to pull the ship apart if you have two people trying to steer it.
Yeah. But if we're going to continue with the business analogy, right? You can have a manager or a CEO or somebody who makes that final decision, but then you can also have individual contributors that are paid just as much as that person, right? You look at like principal engineers, they can be paid just as much or more than managers of different levels, right? So this is in no way saying that one person has more value than another.
Even economic value.
Yeah. The problem is sometimes every single person gets a say, and the problem when everyone gets a say is that the ratio of the input that each person has is oftentimes relative to like how assertive they are, their ability to argue, the loudness of their voice, instead of the validity of the idea itself, right? You can have like a couple vocal people in the room, and it from just like kind of an outside standpoint, it can look like, oh, well, yeah, sure, everybody agrees with this. But when you've got one person that's tasked with managing this, they can factor in these various opinions, and I think more logically value each one and then execute on a decision. Like, my mind always goes to engineering things when we talk about questions like this. I think it's just very easy and oftentimes straightforward to understand. And one of the things I'm thinking about with this is like working on a project. And somewhat recently, kind of a divisive product came out of Apple, as they oftentimes do. It's the new iMac. It looks totally different than before. A lot of kind of odd design decisions were made, whether you like them or not. Okay? And I think what's so interesting about it is you had a bunch of people initially balking at the product. But after it's sat out on the market for a little while, I think people have begun to better understand what the product is actually for. And after understanding that kind of initial goal, then you understand all of the decisions that cascade out of it. So, for instance, this new iMac, it's got a bunch of weird things. One of them is that it's got white bezels. Very weird design decision. Doesn't really happen on desktop computers, right? A lot of people didn't like it. And you've got like not as many ports on the back, and the computer is really thin, like almost to a detriment, and people thought that they were going to get rid of kind of like the chin bar on the Mac, but it's still there, right? So like all of these kind of wacky, weird design decisions that a bunch of like people in the tech space and pros didn't like. Okay. But what I see with it now in hindsight is like a very clear, straightforward, singular, executed vision. And that vision is for an approachable PC that looks good in the home for like casual users. And you can kind of see this in Apple's marketing. It's not a computer set up at like a workstation with somebody doing heavy video and photo editing on it. It's people using it for everyday things in a kitchen, in a family room, right out in the open. And it's only after understanding that like initial goal that you begin to see that singular vision. And people are beginning to see that now, despite arguing about certain things before. And now digital artists have made renders of this same iMac with some of the things that these pros were asking for, be that black bezels or removal of the chin or what have you. And they're pointing out like, oh, actually, yeah, if you do put black bezels on it, it kind of looks incongruent.
It's a little heavier looking.
Yeah, it looks heavy. It's not as approachable.
I still don't think there's any excuse for some of those colors they made.
Some of the colors I agree are quite bad. They only really would work in like a niche situation. But I think they're trying to harken back to the original iMac colors with them. But I think that that's a great example of somebody was able to execute on a vision. And I think that it's worked out really well in this case. It might not be for you, but it's for a lot of people. And by contrast, sometimes you get something that really just doesn't work out well. At least, certainly not in the way that you thought. So like another example, we'll go with Apple again. It's kind of in the same ballpark. You're rolling your eyes, but that's fine. And the product I'm talking about is a 12-inch MacBook, okay? It's super, super tiny. It's got a single USB port and a headphone jack, that's all. And what they did was they built the whole computer just around the keyboard. So it's just barely big enough to have a full-size keyboard on the thing. And they innovated on a variety of different things to try and keep this computer as thin and light as possible, okay? They have Terrace batteries inside. They introduced the Force Touch trackpad to make it thinner. They have a thin butterfly keyboard. They have no fan in the device, okay? And there are a bunch of compromises. Things like a 480p webcam and low key travel on the keyboard. No light up Apple logo, which all the other Macs had at the time. Only has one port for absolutely everything, and it doesn't have MagSafe, which all the other Macs had at the time. And if you had people on the project and everyone was given their own input and we had some egalitarian thing, yeah, sure, a bunch of these things wouldn't have come up. But none of that would have been the goal. The goal was to make the most portable, thin and light laptop that they could, with a regular sized keyboard. Something you could literally just like toss in a bag. Something so sleek and simple it practically disappears. The problem when there isn't like one singular leader is that a bunch of opinions get interjected. Like imagine if somebody had said that the laptop needed to have like an HDMI port and it's definitely got to have like an SD card reader. Right? And of course we have to have a 720p webcam. Of course, like these are minimum requirements. Well, it wouldn't have been the same thing. If they said, oh, well, yeah, I mean, we have to have a certain level of performance. That means we got to throw a fan in it. Well, now it's not the same thing anymore. It's not the same laptop. We're not executing on that vision. Now we're having this weird amalgamation of all of what a bunch of different people value. And I think in the end, anything that's going to be the absolute best at something is going to have a bunch of compromises. And the trick is just making sure that those compromises are the right ones.
And they fit the vision, right?
Yeah, and they fit the vision. Like, think if people were complaining that, like, oh, race cars are too loud. Like, it's not a race car anymore. No, the point of a race car is to have it be, like, as fast as possible. I think, honestly, marketing is a lot to blame for some of this stuff. Because sometimes it's just, like, so deceptive. You know, like I've talked to you about this before. I saw an ad, and I think I tweeted about this too, because it really gets to me. The ad was for like some Honda crossover, right? One of those cars that's designed to take like the kids to soccer practice, you know, which is fine. But they've got the car like off-roading, right? It's like driving up a mountain, right? It's like this Honda can summit Mount Everest. You're like, no, can we just be honest? Can we just be honest? The car is designed to take the kids to soccer practice. Just be honest about the vision, right? We made a bunch of compromises to get the kids to soccer practice safely with as little fuel as needed, right? That was the vision. You just clearly assert what that vision was.
Or it's like when Buick is making these commercials, like, we're these cool hip cars that all the young kids want these days, and it's like, no, you're the crappy looking turd cars that I make fun of when I see. That's your role in the world. Don't try to be something you're not. You're the car that everyone makes fun of. That's your role.
The Buick fans are going to be in the comments of this too. You're pissing off the Range Rover and the Buick fans.
No one's a Buick fan. No one buys a Buick because they want to. They buy a Buick because they have to.
Right. Like, but it's not just Honda. It's not just Buick. Like, you see it. Someone will be driving some Hyundai Elantra, right, in some ad, and they'll be like drifting it in the rain on like a race course, just tearing up back roads on some scenic highway and, you know, Yosemite National Park, and you're like, what? Come on.
Hyundai, come on. You're the cheap car.
Yeah.
That is cheap for people who want a cheap car. That's it. It's okay. It's fine. There's a place in the market for that.
Exactly.
We all know that's what your purpose is.
It's to get groceries. It's a grocery getter, which is fine. We need a bunch of grocery getters. In fact,
for the person who drives 4,000 miles a year.
Yeah. To get groceries and to get the kids from school and to go to work. Yeah. The problem...
Like down the street to the church potluck. That's what that car's for.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the problem oftentimes you get on the projects, though, is like everyone's got their little thing, right, that they want, and they're just going to push for. Like, you see it in the government, too. Like, I think that's part of the reason why the government is so ineffective. Like, everyone has their thing that they want to get added to the bill, right? Like, oh, you know, my mom died from breast cancer, so I want, you know, $12 million in this bill to go to, like, breast cancer research.
Oh, yeah, and before you know it, a bill is 127,000 pages long, and it has 53 different things that it funds, and it's called, like, the Life Protection Act, and then in the bill they're funding, like, you know, math classes in Africa and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Yeah, and you've got 50 things that are unrelated.
What is this bill for? This is the miscellaneous bill that everyone wanted to throw whatever they wanted into it.
Yeah, and then they just, to your point, they slap some disingenuous name. That's the same thing with the marketing, right? They go, oh, yeah, like, this is totally what it is. This is an off-roader that can go up the mountain. Oh, yeah, this is the you'll vote for it if you love kids act. If you vote against
the bill, you hate kids in Africa. You don't want them to be educated.
Obviously, you hate the kids. At the end of the day, you just got to be clear about what your vision is and market it on that and have one singular vision and execute on it. And I think when that happens, when you have a singular vision, one person that makes the final decision, you can come up with some of the most crazy, amazing things. Like, we'll go back to the car world, because I like that, okay? There was a man named Gordon Murray, and he worked for McLaren's F1 team, okay? So it's like the pinnacle of racing, okay? And he was tasked...
NASCAR racing? What kind of...
F1? Formula 1? Not NASCAR. Okay, I just brought up FIFA, and you went, like the NFL? What are you talking about? Okay.
Pretend like you're talking to someone who knows nothing about racing. Just pretend.
Okay.
You're not. You're definitely not. But pretend like you are.
Okay, so there's this one dude. His name was Gordon Murray, and he worked for McLaren's F1 racing team. This is like the pinnacle of sports car racing, engineering, technology. The absolute best of the best. Okay, cutting edge technology.
And that's different than NASCAR.
Correct.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Now you're
Just wanna
pissing
make
off
sure,
the F1 fans
I just want to
too.
make sure the listeners are following along and they're able to.
Oh boy. Okay, so Gordon Murray from the McLaren team, he's tasked with building a road car, right? A car that you can go out and drive on the streets, okay?
Are race cars not road cars?
No, they are not road legal. Oh boy. Okay. So he's tasked with building a road car. Okay?
I'm just trying to think of what someone who doesn't know anything about racing might ask. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Okay.
I know the answers.
Sure.
I'm
sure
thinking
you
about
do.
what someone
Yeah,
else would maybe ask
okay.
so that your story makes the most sense.
Trust me, it'll add up here, okay? They spend tons of money and tons of time developing this. And Gordon Murray makes every single decision. There are stories about him literally holding washers in his hands and measuring them and sending them back saying like, no.
Measuring them?
Yeah, like measuring the thickness, measuring the weight, and saying like, no, this is too heavy. Get me a washer made out of this material. Okay, he's making every single final decision. He is the singular sign-off point. Okay, and he strives for nothing but perfection here. Okay, and in the end, they make the McLaren F1. This is considered by many to be the greatest car of all time. Okay? It breaks a bunch of records, wins a ton of races.
I thought it was a street car.
Yeah. It was not designed to go racing. People took it racing and still won. It was unheard of. Okay? Breaks literally every single record out there. Okay? Quarter mile times, 0 to 60 times, top speed times, everything.
When was this?
They made it from 92 to 98. Okay.
They actually made this for the public to buy?
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a project car?
Correct. Now, it's crazy expensive, and it uses the best engineering technology at the time. But to this day, like, people consider this the greatest car of all time. And this was possible because one man was given the reins to make every single decision. And there are crazy things on this car. Like most cars, you've got 2-seaters, you've got 4-seaters, right? This car is a 3-seater.
Oh.
Okay? So you drive sitting in the center of the car. There are a whole litany of other...
Oh, this is the one where you have 2 in the back and 1 in the front?
Yeah, so one person flanked over like each shoulder, and then one person center seat, perfect viewing angles. Okay? Now, that's just one thing of many with this. But all of these crazy things were only possible because one dude was able to execute on whatever he thought was going to be best.
Surely he had some engineering input.
Oh, yeah, he had... perfect tie-in to earlier. Yeah, he had tons of engineers around him. He had tons of help. But at the end of the day, he signed off on every single thing. And he was responsible for each thing.
Mixed up into the politics of trying to appease everyone and all these different inputs and varying ideas and visions about what it was going to be.
Yeah. Now, obviously, he didn't come up with every single idea. And he's not supposed to be credited with the entire vehicle. Right? He has a whole engineering team behind him. And many of those engineers are just as important. Okay? But at the end of the day, they had one person making the decision. That's when you get the greatest successes. When one person's vision is executed. Well, with that, it's getting late. But recently, I've been kind of thinking about robots and AI and how that kind of relates to human evolution and human motivations. And I think a lot of human evolution and driving factors in our history relates to a need to reproduce, right? It's motivated by a desire or a need to reproduce, right? That sexual motivation drives a lot of things in human nature. And I kind of wonder if robots and AI would need kind of like a motivating or singular type of end goal like that. Something where, yeah, like something where they do need to like reproduce in some way, some underlying motivation like that to get them to work fully, right? If we're actually going to get artificial general intelligence, I think something like that might be necessary. I mean, we're not really aware of any other intelligence, any other animal or creature that doesn't have a real fundamental motivation to reproduce, to create offspring. But that's just what I've been musing about recently. If you have any interesting thoughts, feel free to reach out to us at secondpartypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, thank you again. Have a good night.